Thank you, Mr. Speaker. These are interesting times, and I build more respect for my friend from Arizona every time I hear him speak, and I'm very grateful for his presence and his efforts. At this point, I'd like to address this ongoing issue, ongoing for only about 3 years, because it was immediately upon President Trump being elected president that we immediately started hearing all of the saber-rattling that we've got to impeach this guy, he's not qualified, he's crazy, he's committed crimes, and we've been hearing for nearly 3 years, there's no question, there's lots of direct evidence President Trump has committed crimes, a lot more than you might think. In fact, a lot more than circumstantial evidence. Oh, it's overwhelming. We've heard from so many people for nearly 3 years. Well, actually over 3 years now. Over 3 years. And then we get down to it. The great hope was the man that I believe did more damage to the FBI than all of the FBI directors for the last 50 years. A guy named Mueller. He ran off thousands and thousands of years of our best FBI experience. Apparently he just wanted yes people. He didn't want people that had enough experience to tell him when he was on the wrong track. He said he had no reason to apologize when he destroyed lives of innocent people. And yet that is the person who was put in charge of this investigation. And what did he do? He went out and hired over a dozen people that absolutely despise Donald Trump, put them to work to trying to destroy our sitting president, and they harassed his family and him, business associates, people in the administration, threatened their families, threatened them. And even after all that, after virtually 2 years, nearly 2 years of investigation by the Mueller cabal, they had nothing. They had nothing. And I think Mueller would have been happy to keep investigating and using up millions and millions of taxpayers' dollars, tens of millions, as he had been doing. But fortunately, his investigation came to an end after thousands of witnesses. They had nothing. No Russia collusion. It was a hoax. So it turned out to be. And so when it was clear there was no Russia collusion, of course it's not a crime to collude, it's a crime to conspire. There was no Russian conspiracy between anybody with the Trump campaign and the Russians. But it's very clear the Russians, what they really wanted, for people that have really dug into this, they wanted, and what they always want, always have wanted, back when it was the Soviet Union, they want to divide America. They want to destroy this republic. And unfortunately, they found allies, willing or otherwise, here in this country to take absolute lies that were created, were spun up, were twisted, had the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act court, the FISA court, manipulated fraud upon the FISA court, which is exposed to me as a former judge and Chief Justice that since we have seen nothing from the FISA courts of outrage as a good judge should have when they realize there's been a fraud upon the court, nothing, which tells me we either need to totally get rid of the FISA courts or we need to have some dramatic changes, and we certainly need to change the FISA judges themselves, because either they were unwilling and unknowing accomplices with the fraud upon the court, or they knew what was going on, and he or she or they were proud to play a part in trying to destroy the Trump campaign and the Trump presidency. So then I think it's interesting, this call between President Trump and President Zelensky, July 25th. I mean, when so many people, we find out now, so many people were on the call, including at least 4 stenographers taking down every word. And that, I mean, I've been in courts for my whole adult life, and you might have a stenographer miss word here and there. They're amazing. They hardly ever make mistakes. But if you have 4 stenographers sitting on a call, you're not going to have 4 stenographers miss anything when they consult each other and work together. That's just not going to happen. I had one of the best court reporters in the world, and, you know, there's a mistake now and then. You put 4 people like that together, like we're taking down the president and President Zelensky's call, and they don't make mistakes. But it had to send shivers up the spines of anybody in our intelligence community that had worked with Ukrainians, Russians, former MI6, Italians, Australians, to try to destroy President Trump. It had to send shivers up their spine. It had to get them very concerned. Oh my gosh, this president is going to close in on us, because this new president, we understand he's honest. That's what we keep hearing, that he wants to end corruption in Ukraine. Because this whole body, I think there were maybe 10 or 12 or so that didn't vote for the bill in 2014 that talks about Ukrainian corruption and how we need to push them to ending that corruption. So, I mean, everybody on this floor basically knows, and I think the no votes were based on some other reason, not on a desire not to end corruption. We all had the same goal, just concerns about different parts. But the fact is, people know there's been a lot of corruption. And it sounds like President Zelensky wants to end it. And you put that with a president who doesn't mind rattling cages and trying to drain the swamp and trying to change the way we do things for the better. And, of course, it offends those, whether they say they're part of the deep state or not. It's the people that work here that have never elected here, but they think they run this country. And those in embassies who, beyond what they are assigned to do, they think they run foreign policy. And we've gotten a taste of that through these hearings and through these witnesses and through their testimony. And the star witness yesterday, Mr. Taylor, I don't impugn his military service, but I know if he had been the kind of gossip monger in the Army or at West Point that he's turned into at the State Department, he sure wouldn't have gone very far. His next OER in the Army would have destroyed his career. In West Point, he would have gotten the lowest peer review ratings, and he would not have done very well at all. So this is apparently a different Mr. Taylor than the one that went through West Point and served honorably and well in the Army. But as Ambassador Sondland testified, and our friend Jim Jordan read yesterday, Ambassador Taylor recalls, and this is Sondland's testimony, that Tim Morrison told Ambassador Taylor that I, Sondland, told Mr. Morrison that I conveyed this message to Yermak on September 1st, 2019, in connection with Vice President Pence's visit to Warsaw and a meeting with President Zelensky. Astounding. And that is where Mr. Taylor says he got his clear understanding of what had happened. And if you look at his testimony, you get a real sense of how this honorable serving military member, fine graduate of West Point, has been tainted over the years. You look at his testimony. First of all, he said something like, in answer to questions, he had never seen aid conditioned on political interests, and yet what he probably had in his mind is he'd never seen aid conditioned on something he disagreed with. But most of our aid is conditioned on something, and if it's not, we need to find it and get conditions on it. And as I've said ever since I've been here, you don't have to pay people to hate you. They'll do it for free, and yet our country continues to pay dictators that hate us. That stuff ought to be stopped. It ought to be conditioned on making those countries less corrupt, and that's what this House has tried to do on both sides of the aisle in prior years to end corruption in Ukraine. But you get a sense of things when this is his testimony at page 11, Mr. Taylor's. Let's see, the first summary of the July 5th, 25th Trump-Zelensky call that I heard from anybody inside the U.S. government was during a phone call I had with Tim Morrison, Dr. Hill's recent replacement at the NSC, on July 28th. And that's what Ambassador Sondland was apparently talking about. He got that from Tim Morrison that conveyed a message that Yermak got from Ambassador Sondland about Vice President Pence's visit to Warsaw and meeting with President Zelensky. But he goes on, and his next statement, next paragraph, by August, I was becoming concerned. Yeah, Mr. Taylor was becoming concerned because he had heard firsthand the president wanted to end some corruption in Ukraine that was affecting the United States election. I thought that's what everybody here wanted to do. That's what we've been hearing from the left wing, or many call it the mainstream, but the left wing, alt-left media. They've been saying, oh, how horrible. Well, here you got a president trying to do something about it, and Mr. Taylor, the wonderful, honorably serving Army man, is now concerned because of the fourth-hand account he got about what the president did. And now we're told, oh, and by the way, I heard about a staffer who overheard a conversation between the ambassador and the president, and he mentioned the interviews, asked some question about the interviews, maybe how they were going. Oh, my goodness. The investigation wanted to know how it was going. Gee, how horrible that we had a president that wanted to know about corruption in Ukraine that was affecting the United States. And then we get down, and I think this tells us a great deal about their star witness until his staffer, who was eavesdropping and heard a conversation, we're told. But Mr. Taylor says, a formal U.S. request to the Ukrainians to conduct an investigation based on violations of their own law struck me as improper. Well, my understanding was the president wants to know about corruption in Ukraine that may have violated American law, our laws. Work with our U.S. Attorney General to try to get to the bottom of Ukrainians not Ukraine per se, but Ukrainians' effort to affect our election. So that offends these deep staters in the State Department, these people that don't like a president that doesn't see things exactly like they do. How dare this president come in and want to exert his foreign policy that he got elected to put in place? He doesn't understand. We're the ones that run things, and you see it here. He says that struck me as improper. I am the judge, the purveyor of what's right or not in my realm. And you find that in a number of people in the State Department. We run things, and of course they come in and testify. I've worked for this many presidents, carried out their foreign policy, and then we find out what that means. I carry out their foreign policy as long as they do what I tell them, or I ignore them and carry out what I know is much better. And you get that sense. He goes on, and I recommended to Ambassador Volker, we stay clear, because I, Mr. Taylor, know much better than the elected president. I know better than the Attorney General. I know better than all of these clowns who are elected or been confirmed by the Senate. Who are they to go around what I think? And he goes on to find out the legal aspects of the question. However, I gave him, the ambassador, the name of a deputy assistant attorney general whom I thought would be the proper point of contact for seeking a U.S. request for a foreign investigation. How dare President Trump try to go around the way I, Mr. Taylor, think that foreign affairs ought to be handled and the way corruption ought to be addressed when it affects the United States. How dare him? I'm the one that knows these things, not this clown president. I mean, it's pretty clear what was in his mind, and it needs to stop. And I would just suggest, Constitution, thank you. I would suggest, as if we have a vote to send this matter of impeachment, actually impeach this president for violating the sense of propriety of somebody that's so deep in the state and in the intel that they don't like somebody coming in trying to drain the swamp. They think if that's what they want to impeach this president over, trying to end corruption in Ukraine that affects our election, well then the Senate, I know some have said, oh, we're not going to have a vote on that. Well, imagine they probably will, and they're going to need to have a trial. And in looking back and researching this again, you know, there are no rules of evidence for impeachment. There are no rules of procedure. Constitution provides for it, but the impeachment trial in the Senate, but as I understand it, the Senate may have even gone to the old Senate chamber to have a session out from under C-SPAN cameras to work out the rules of evidence and procedure, limit time, limit witnesses, how questions asked, all that. They got to come up with that every impeachment. New set of rules. And I would point to Article 3, Section 3 for a little bit of guidance here. Article 3, Section 3 talks about treason. And President Trump is not guilty of any treason. He's not being accused of treason except from people that are suffering from PTSD, that's President Trump stress disorder. But otherwise, there will be no charge of treason against this president because it didn't happen. But it is such an important issue when you talk about removing a duly elected president for the first time in our history. And there's a rule on treason. It's in the Constitution. No person shall be convicted of treason unless on the testimony of two witnesses to the same overt act. That means direct evidence, no hearsay. It's two people that actually witnessed this despicable act. And I would submit to the Senate that removing a president properly, duly elected for the first time in our history, even after there were Ukrainians and Russians trying to help the Democrats to keep him from being elected, he still won, got a huge majority of the Electoral College votes, and this would be every bit as serious as charging someone with treason. The Senate ought to set a rule that says we got to have 2 direct witnesses to whatever they're saying is he did wrong. We're not going to take hearsay to remove a president for the first time. And I would suggest if the Senate would do that, they won't even have to worry about setting time deadlines, witness deadlines. Just put that requirement on, and it will be a very short trial because there are no direct witnesses of any allegation that would rise to the level of what is being accused here. Now, I want to turn quickly to the issue of some of our United States military personnel who have been unfairly treated, people who saw it as their patriotic duty to sign up and serve this country, risk their lives and limbs and their life as a family member to serve this country. Greater love hath no one. Jesus told us that they would be willing to lay down their lives for their friends. And that's what these people do. My group, my 4 years on active duty, we were never sent to combat. But we have currently a Secretary of the Department of Defense who is trying to stop efforts and came out and publicly basically threatened the president, don't you dare try to right what you think are wrongs in people that I would tell you have been railroaded by a broken military justice system. The reason Congress created the UCMJ, where military members don't even get all the rights that we give to terrorists, to foreign terrorists illegally in our country. We don't give our military as many rights as they have. And the reason we had to shortcut, or Congress did back when the UCMJ was passed, because both sides of the aisle understood when you're in a combat theater, you don't have time to go back and have a thorough investigation, gather up all the forensic evidence, and then come back and have a nice jury trial in America. You got to deal with it quickly and get back on the battlefield. And yet what we've seen over and over, when the military chooses for political expedience or political correctness purposes, or when they want to satisfy a terrible leader like Maliki was in Iraq, who created all kinds of trouble for that country, we send a vice president over to stand by him and say, we're going to get these guys. Or to tell Karzai, a corrupt family in Afghanistan, oh yeah, we're going to prosecute our guys that turned out killed people who created IEDs that killed Americans, people that were Taliban trying to kill Americans, and yet we've hung some of our own people out to dry. So we have a letter, a bunch of us do, should go out in the morning, I guess, to the Defense Secretary. And, you know, I put the words in there myself that I think if he doesn't realize that there need to be some corrections within military justice so we don't keep sending innocent people defending our country, defending their brothers and sisters on the battlefield, if we don't stop sending them to prison, then and bring them back to America for a trial, don't allow the defendant to bring witnesses back from the combat theater. Oh no, but the CID and our officials will make deals with Taliban or with people in Iraq that want to destroy our country and us, if they'll come over and say terrible things about our military member, we'll put them in prison and we'll give them visas. And that happened with Sergeant Derek Miller. We got a whole bunch of people. Clint Lawrence, hoping that the president will act, apparently got slowed down by the defense secretary jumping in. John Hatley, a first sergeant, 2 Bronze Stars, should have gotten a Silver Star, but that was apparently pulled as a recommendation. But Michael Bahena, Corey Claggett, we got a whole bunch of folks, and we have a Congressional Justice for Warriors caucus here that's working on this. And we had a guy who recognized a Taliban member from the day before when he had his AK-47 and grabbed him in the middle of our U.S. Army camp in Afghanistan and starts questioning him, and he starts lying through the interpreter. Oh, I was here to fix electrical. Oh, no, I was here to fix plumbing. And that sergeant pulled his gun and demanded answers. The guy grabs for the gun, and in the struggle, the Taliban member was shot. That sergeant was brought back to America. The translator, they told separate stories. They told separate stories, but they were the same story told separately. Yet after the CID got through promising, or somebody promising, this guy that had been trying to get a visa into America to turn down every time, if you will come to America and testify that the Taliban member never grabbed his gun, then we'll give you and your family visas. You'll probably be able to get citizenship. Oh, okay. Then that's my story now. He never tried to grab the gun. And you threaten another witness that was there. He's going to prison if you don't turn around and change what you've said from the very beginning without any influence from Sergeant Miller. And you put the guy in prison for premeditated murder. You don't have the weapon. Oh, no, you don't let him have the weapon. You don't have it examined so that it can show that the fingerprints of the Taliban member were on that gun. He did try to grab it, and he's sentenced for premeditated murder for the rest of his life. Well, we got that turned around. We got it paroled, and thank God we did. He's one of the finest people I've ever known, Sergeant Derek Miller here, working for me now. And he's working for our caucus, and we have a system that's broken, and we need to fix it. And if our Secretary of Defense doesn't recognize that, he needs to go, and we need to take the money that we have allowed them to use to drag people back to America, away from the combat field, away from juries that have combat experience. We need to put them on trial in a civil federal court and let them have all the rights and privileges they should have as American citizens. If you're not going to do it in the combat theater the proper way with a proper investigation, let's bring them back. Use your money from defense. Use that not in courts martial, but here in the United States in a civil court. And that will
time has expired.
What
Purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey seek recognition?